Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilman is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 7 of my Boomsday Project card review. Have a ton of cards, including some new legendaries, exciting stuff. If you're short on time, hit the quick reviews link in the description. You can just check out all the cards. Otherwise, join me as I jump into these detailed reviews. Up first here, I have a new warrior legendary spell, the Boomship. And I love the idea and the artwork of this card. You're deploying minions from Dr. Boom's big ship, apparently. 9 mana spell here. Summon 3 minions from your hand and give them Rush. And obviously that is a big boost to the board if you can summon 3 large dudes. And not only that, but your 3 large dudes suddenly also have the chance to immediately impact the board, which I think is really, really important. Because we've seen other cards around this mana cost, and even historically for Warrior, that have summoned things onto the board. Think Varian Rin back in the day. We have Master Oakheart that can do that today, summon quite a few things into play. And those were okay plays in the case of Varian Rin. You could run that in a Tempo Warrior if you were a little bit ahead or pressuring your opponent, but it was a pretty risky thing to do if you're behind because you're spending your whole turn and you're not making an immediate impact. And then with Master Oakheart, traditionally when you play that sort of card, you get big taunt minions as we see it today. So you're making a defensive play, or at the very least setting up with a Hadronox, Naturalize, something like that, that helps you stay alive. And that's the important part to consider when you're looking at a big high cost card like this. Can I play it and still contest the board? Can I play it and still stay alive? And because with the Boomship that your minions get Rush, I think that means you can, which really opens up the doors for the quality of this card. If they didn't get Rush, it was just a basic, summon 3 minions kind of card. It'd be tough for this to be good. Because they can attack right away, clear the board, contest the board, suddenly I'm pretty excited about the potential for this one, and I think it's a rather strong card. Because Control Warrior is often going to be able to sit on big minions, just contest the board, just hang out, just brawl, just armor up, do the things they want to do, and line up a hand or a game state where playing the Boomship will give them an enormous lead. And remember that just because you're giving your minions Rush, that does not deny them the ability to charge. So there's even the potential to do an OTK Big Burst combo with something like this as well. For instance, you could run 2 charged Devilsaurs and a Grom Hellscream, and you could play the Boomship if they're the only 3 minions in your hand, and you could then cast a Whirlwind to activate your Grom for 10 mana, and suddenly you would have a 24 damage burst option played into the board, assuming your opponent didn't have Taunt. Now, things like that aren't obviously super easy to line up, right? Because you have to have the right minions in hand. Presumably, you're going to want to run other minions. You might have to play one preemptively before that. So I'm not saying this is necessarily the foundation for some obscene OTK deck, just that it's possible. The charge still works. So there are endless options here. You could run it in a Malygos deck somehow and do some kind of crazy Malygos shenanigan. We haven't seen that with Warrior much, right? But it's possible. Malygos and a couple other things to protect your Malygos and build a big board. You could just do it with scary large minions like Lich King and Ysera to make an insane turn where your opponent can't remove everything and you generate tons of value. You could play it with big taunts like we talked about with Oakheart. The options go across the board, making this the kind of card that as long as it's in a slower deck, it seems like it could fit. Now, there are, of course, downsides to a card like this. It's not just universally good all of the time. You do have to have minions in hand, and if you don't have those minions in hand, you're sitting on a dead card. Not to mention the card itself is just rather slow at 9 mana, so it's not going to make an impact until later in the game. It's not something you're going to want to see in your opening hand because you're going to need options to keep up with faster decks in the meta most of the time. So risks and big rewards with the Boomship. But that said, I think the reward is big enough, consistent enough, it's active enough, and that it's got an instant element thanks to that Rush that it's probably going to work, and it's probably going to see some play. So I think this is a strong card. So now let's move on to another Warrior card, and I think this is also an insanely strong Warrior card. This is the Eternium Rover, a 1 mana 1/3 mech. And it reads, whenever this minion takes damage, gain 2 armor. So, it's an Armor Smith's little robot cousin or little robot assistant, apparently. but a little different in the operation, right? It's not when friendly minions take damage, it's only when your Eternium Rover takes damage. But that's okay, because look at this minion. Just look at it. It's a 1-mana 1/3. That's awesome in its own right. That's fantastic in Hearthstone as we know it today. Warriors already run things like Firefly to give them a minion out early on the board. We run Town Crier to draw a card, but also to get a minion out early on the board. And this does exactly that. This is that Firefly or Dire Mole or whatever early start minion you want to compare it to, which is good. And it's a mech, so you've got mech synergies and build-ons and magnetic options for this card as well. It just gets you out early. If you magnetize this with a mech, early in the game and you start to stack on it, this thing could eat 3 or 4 or 5 hits and give you tons of armor and tons of life gain and survivability into a mid-range or control-style deck. So I think this is the perfect starter piece, probably for aggressive warrior decks, even if you don't care about the armor. Just because it's a cheap, strong 1-mana mech that is going to likely survive into turn 2, maybe even into turn 3, and that gives you that building block for all your magnetic pieces. That's really good. In a defensive deck, this is just a 1-drop you can run to help you contest all the Silverhand recruits in the world, and you gain armor along the way, you kill a couple minions, that's fantastic. Worst case scenario, this goes 1 for 1, and it eats a lightning bolt or something like that, and you gain a couple armor points off of it, and that's like a free hero power attached to a body. That's exciting as well. So, it's not a super awesome, giant, scary, legendary threat or anything like that, but I think this card is just fundamentally strong across the board. It's the perfect opener for a lot of different decks and environments, and exactly the sort of thing Warrior would love to run. So I think this card is going to be played a ton as long as Warrior is played at all, and it's going to be a valuable asset for Warrior moving forward. Whether in a mech deck or not, it's still got potential. That makes this card incredibly strong. So now let's talk about a new neutral minion, and I put this one here because there's a couple cards coming up that are going to be very relevant to this card. This is the Goblin Bomb, a new 1-mana 0/2 mech, and it reads Death Rattle, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So we kind of have like an egg style card here, but it's a mech egg, and it's a bomb too, so it gets a little bonus damage. So it's a leper gnome that can't attack, essentially. Kind of the exact same effect, but 0/2 instead of 1/1, but also a mech. And, this is an awkward card to use in its own right. Like I said, there's going to be some stuff coming up that changes that a little bit as far as this card's concerned. But this card itself is still fairly awkward. You can't attack with it, but it's got an aggressive death rattle. It's a death rattle that wants to play fast and wants to kill your opponent, but by the same token, this minion can't do damage. So those kind of go at odds with one another, right? It's not going to be able to apply damage itself outside of this death rattle. So if you're just looking for a strictly aggressive card, you're going to run Leper Gnome over something like this because it's just got more upside. So the places you'd use this, of course, would be in a mech deck. If you have a mech deck and you play this, your opponent will be somewhat disincentivized from killing it because they don't want to take the death rattle, but ultimately they're not going to be punished that hard, so often this will just eat a trait or 2 and die for free, and you're not going to get much but that 2 damage hero power. But assuming it lives, or you're able to play it in the same turn as a magnetic card, suddenly you've got yourself a nice base, a good cheap mech to build on for magnetic options, which can be important as well. So for instance, you play this out on turn 1, you follow it up with like a spider bomb, or whatever other magnetic thing we haven't seen yet, perhaps. That looks like a little bit better of a play. The question is, are there going to be alternatives that are stronger? For instance, would you run this in Warrior with Eternium Rover that we just saw? Probably not. You'd probably always want that 1/3 body with Eternium Rover over something like Goblin Bomb. So this would have to fall into a more aggressive deck environment. Something like Hunter, for instance, might like this because it's extra damage and it builds into a Mech Hunter core. That could be exciting. Ultimately, though, the card itself, in a vacuum, doesn't do a lot. It requires a lot of other pieces to work, which could be something that hold it back. But if there's any way to activate this death rattle, which there is, and we're going to talk about it soon, also things like Play Dead or Terror Scale Stalker can activate the death rattle, but that would be a pretty low rate of return compared to what we see with Terror Scale Stalker and Play Dead right now, which is summoning 5/5s or summoning Katharinas or Lich Kings or whatever it is. So that's not really how you'd want to use this card either. I just don't think you'd get a lot of return on your investment. And that just leaves it in an awkward spot where this is probably not a card you run by itself very often. I think it's rather weak on its own, but of course, if you include it with other things, maybe it can be good. That said, let's jump into the next card, which is Boommaster Flark, the new legendary minion for Hunter. And this guy's a 7-mana 5/5, and he summons you 4 Goblin Bombs. That's right. So Goblin Bomb, maybe you don't run it by yourself, but maybe you see him anyway thanks to Boommaster Flark. And I guess this is kind of the crazy new version of Dr. Boom in a way, because it's a 7-mana minion that summons a bunch of bots that explode. But unfortunately, I don't think Boommaster Flark is nearly as good as Dr. Boom. And that is because he's a 5/5, first off, much lower stat line for 7 mana, not as scary or aggressive or threatening himself. And again, the Goblin Bombs can't attack. Yes, they still do 2 damage, death rattle to your opponent, and that's kind of cool. Once they all blow up, that is worth 8 damage if you get everything for Boommaster Flark to go off. You get 8 damage, and in an aggressive deck, this could be a nice top-end piece that gives your opponent this inevitable board state where once it's resolved, they're like, crap, I'm going to die. I can't afford to take 8 damage. I have to keep those things alive. And then if they keep those things alive, you might be able to build on them with magnetic buffs to apply additional pressure because they left you a minion with initiative on board, so you get to attack immediately if you have some sort of magnetic buff. So it does create a lot of friction, and although you're really only getting 5/5 in active stats with Boommaster Flark the turn you play it, there's a lot that can go wrong for your opponent if you are able to have time to build on that sort of board. So there is some potential for me with this card. I do think it has a lot of problems and challenges. 5/5 for 7 is the only thing that's happening. It's a slow play the turn you play it. No defensive element to it at all. Your opponent, if you're playing against aggro, could just overrun you. It's a slower card. It's 7 mana too. It comes pretty late in your curve, but it has a very aggressive mindset. In other words, it's all about damage, and at that point in the game, you're either trying to stabilize or you're trying to follow up and build on a board or just hit your opponent in the face right away. So it might take a turn or 2 or 3 for Boommaster Flark to really pay off. And in a more aggressive deck that's looking to do that final bit of damage, that might not be enough. So it feels a little awkward and slow in that regard, and a little bit at odds with itself. It's a slow card that's aggressive. It's got a game-ending state, but it takes a while to work. So it's not this big finisher piece as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know that Boommaster Flark makes a ton of sense, but I'll say, anytime you have a minion that just instantly reloads the board with stuff, and he's, remember, 5 minions bundled into 1, usually those have historically been very, very good. It's just a giant wall of garbage for your opponent to deal with, and particularly because there's mechs and mech synergies, and mechs can be activated instantly, that, to me, gives this card a running shot at being decent. And I don't know exactly what kind of deck will run it, but just given that 5 minions at once aspect, I think this will see some level of play. I don't think it's a defining mech card or the centerpiece to a mech deck necessarily, but I have a feeling it's going to work out for a deck here or there somewhere, whether it's via Death Rattle synergies or mech synergies or whatever it is. Like Feign Death, for instance, in Wild will for sure make Boommaster Flark super scary. Of course, my reviews focus more on Standard, so we don't have that as a concern. But nonetheless, anything like that, any sort of extra synergy that develops for Boommaster Flark makes this card much, much better in my mind. And that said, we actually have another Hunter card here that synergizes with both the previous 2 cards, the Goblin Bomb and Boommaster Flark. This is the Fireworks tech, and I love this artwork. It's a 2-mana 2/1 for Hunter, and it reads Battlecry, give a friendly mech +1/+1. If it has Death Rattle, trigger it. So it's like the dream card for your Goblin Bomb, because you can play Goblin Bomb on 1, and you can play Fireworks tech. You can buff the stats on your Goblin Bomb to make it a 1/3. You also get the free 2 damage ping. And of course, you can play this after Boommaster Flark as well on any given Goblin Bomb that spawns. So Fireworks tech is a connecting piece, I think, that really pulls these 2 other cards together. Now, of course, it doesn't inherently make them good just because one card to connect to another card exists doesn't mean the whole package is going to work. There are still a lot of the same problems. You're not always going to have a fireworks tech on curve. It's not always going to line up perfectly. Goblin bombs are still awkward on their own. Boommaster Flark's still awkward on his own. So the flaws don't change. It's just there is a little bit more potential to make the cards work with something like this. Beyond that, of course, Fireworks Tech is also just a good mech synergy card. It doesn't have to be Goblin bombs specifically. We've already seen the Spider Bomb as well for Hunter way earlier in the first day of the reveals. And that also is a Death Rattle mech, so Fireworks Tech works really nicely there as well. The stats itself on Fireworks Tech, not that good, right? 2-1 for 2, not exciting. But given that it has a buff built in and this extra Death Rattle trigger, which we've seen very successfully in Hunter today with Play Dead, Terror Scale Stalker, both of those cards are really strong right now. Now, keep in mind that Fireworks Tech will only activate the Death Rattle on a mech because the battle cry says give a friendly mech +1/+1. You'll only be targeting mechs, not non-mech. So this is not like an additional trigger in a standard Death Rattle deck as we know it today. This would only be a Death Rattle trigger in a mech deck. So you're only going to run this with mechs, of course, because otherwise it's terrible. So that said, that's one limit on this card. It's only going to work in a specific environment, which, you know, makes it less likely that it's going to succeed, because if Mech Hunter doesn't work, Fireworks Tech, probably just a completely dead card, right? There's nobody that's going to run this thing. So really stuck to this other mechanic, some magnetic pun perhaps intended. But if that works, if that takes off, this is going to be a key card and a very, very strong option for those decks. It has everything you want it to do. Strong active buff component. The Death Rattle trigger is insanely strong with a couple cards, Spider Bomb in particular. This becomes a deadly shot bundled into this card, which is crazy. Or it just becomes a free hero power with your Goblin bombs. Love Fireworks Tech, really strong, works nicely with the mech stuff. But of course, that's its one big limit, only mechs. And speaking of Death Rattle mechs, let's talk about Mechanical Whelp. All these pieces are connecting together. This is a new 6-mana neutral minion, a 2/2 mech, and it has a Death Rattle that reads, summon a 7/7 Mechanical Dragon. So this is an interesting card, right? If we just look at it on its own, ignoring any sort of Death Rattle synergy or mech synergy, I think this is a rather weak card because it's a 9/9 in total stats, right? But the 7/7 part of it, which is the most important part, is extremely backloaded. It's going to take forever for that to work. You know, you play this, your opponent does not kill it, so you kill something with your Mechanical Whelp or suicide your Whelp somehow. You summon the 7/7, but your 7/7 still doesn't get to attack for another turn. So there's basically this huge delay in actually getting the 7/7 to work. Again, in a vacuum, not considering any sort of synergy cards. So on its own, really looks like a weak card. It's just so slow and awkward and susceptible to silence, and there's a lot of problems. It gets a little better when you start to consider ways to activate this Death Rattle instantly. We just saw with our Fireworks Tech that there are options for this immediately in Hunter. Also, of course, Play Dead, Terror Scale Stalker don't change. You even got things like Carnivorous Cube that can activate your Mechanical Whelp as well, summoning you a 7/7. But again, even that's awkward because, you know, you're getting the 2/2s in your cube and they have a long delay to work as well. So maybe not the best play, but certainly Play Dead and Terror Scale Stalker getting you a 7/7 is pretty exciting because you still have the original 7/7 baked into your Whelp, and that's just a big old pile of stats for 6 mana. The problem is, of course, is that that's just worse than what we have now with Death Rattle Hunter. When you're Play Deading or Terror Scale Stalkering right now, you're getting 5/5s on turn 3 or turn 4 instead of 7/7s on turn 7, right? It's more impactful to get a 5/5 on 3 than it is a 7/7 on 7, for instance. That's just a much bigger swing earlier in the game, much, much stronger. Beyond that, compared to things like Silver Vanguard or Katharina Winterwisp, you're only getting a 7/7. It's only a mech. It doesn't have Rush. It doesn't have Charge. It doesn't have other strong effects. You get Lich King sometimes off your Silver Vanguards, for instance. So I don't really think this ever replaces that core Death Rattle Recruit Hunter build that exists now. I think all of those options are better. That said, this could still work in a mech-specific kind of environment, because if you're building your deck around mechs and mech synergies, and it also has that Death Rattle synergy component, thanks to last 3 cards we've talked about, you wouldn't likely run Katharina Winterwisp. You're not sticking in Charged Devil Swords. You're not putting in Lich King. So Mechanical Whelp could serve as a viable option, as a mid to late game big kind of scary combo piece that helps you get a ton of stats onto the board. It's a mechanical dragon that's summoned as well, so even it has the mech synergies beyond just the Mechanical Whelp being a mech. All of that to me means that this is likely still a rather slow and awkward card in some ways, but has a reasonable amount of potential to work in that kind of hunter deck. But again, when a card is attached to one specific deck, that's scary. And I don't think, for instance, Warrior is going to be able to utilize this successfully, even though they could kill a 2/2 stat line pretty easily with things like Warpath or just any sort of whirlwind effect. It's still just a big delay, and ultimately it's just stats. There's no other effect or instant aspect to it, so problematic to play in almost every board state without really getting some stats immediately via play dead, etc. That means limited, hard to work with everybody else. Still not the strongest card, but not unplayable. I think there's a chance in that Mech Hunter, if it builds more mid-range, which it looks like it might with Boommaster Flark, this is a card that could barely make the cut in that list. So now let's talk about a new Shaman spell, Eureka. And cool artwork here, good name, science name. And it's a 6 mana spell for Shaman. It reads, summon a copy of a random minion from your hand. And 97% of the time, that's not very good. Most random minions don't have a high cost. You don't want to summon 3 drops with your Eureka. But of course, if you build your deck specifically around a card like this, and you, for instance, summon a 6 mana Malygos, and you have 4 mana remaining for lightning bolts or whatever else, then this card starts to look very interesting. And on top of that, note that this is a copy of a random minion. So you can still keep the Malygos in your hand. You could play a second Eureka, get another Malygos with still 4 mana available to do more burst damage with Lava Bursts or whatever else it might be. So you could Eureka one turn, Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt. That is what, an 18 damage burst turn, I think. You get 10 and 8, that sounds right. Of course, you overload a lot, so you wait a turn or two. You Eureka again, you Lava Burst, you Lightning Bolt, another 18 damage. You play your final Malygos, I don't know what else to combo with it. I don't think there's any other damage spells left. Frost Shock, I guess there is. And you do even more damage. And that sounds exciting, but recognize what I did there, right? I had the exact right perfect set of like 6 cards in hand for this combo. I only had 1 minion in my hand for this combo. So that's really, really hard to make it work. That said, even an 18 damage burst with just those first few cards I talked about is really, really crazy. Or even just a couple lightning bolts and frost shocks become very, very powerful. And Shaman has a lot of survivability tools. So even though it's awkward, even though it'd be hard, this could bring back the rise of Malygos Shaman. It might just work. It could line up. Is that going to be better than Shudderwalk Shaman? I don't think so. I think Shudderwalk might just be a better terminal end state than something like Malygos, because you get to run other minions and other things, and it's less difficult to build your deck. Now, with Eureka, of course, you still could run other minions. You could just wait till the very end of the game to play Malygos, or just wait till it lines up, or play your minions first. But all of that makes it more challenging and hard to work. You might also just be able to use this on, generic large threat value minions like your Ysera's and Lich Kings of the world, but the discount's not nearly as significant in that case. It's nice that they're copies so that you have multiple instances of a given threat. That's pretty strong. Maybe in some kind of just big control shaman that's not combo oriented, you could do something cool there where you just have a lot of threats thanks to Eureka. And of course, because of the card Electra Storm Surge, which plays any spell in a given turn twice, you could actually summon 2 copies of anything you summon. 2 Malygos into 1 Lightning Bolt is possible with Electra Storm Surge into Eureka. And even that alone is a 13 damage burn right there that also summons you 2 4/12s and another minion on top of it. So clearly there are ways for this thing to work. It's just lining it up, figuring it out. Is it too awkward? Is there a better line anyway that gives you a better win condition? That's going to be the challenge for this card, but I do think fundamentally it has some strengths. It does something you want it to do. There are discounts, there are copies, there are cool elements of this card. So I think it's a solid thing that could inspire a deck in the meta without too much difficulty, but certainly not easily. So now let's talk about Crystology, a new spell for Paladin. This one's at 2 mana, and it reads, draw 2 1-attack minions from your deck. And this is a kind of simple, boring card as far as I'm concerned. It's a 2 mana, draw 2, which That's good. That's better than things like Arcane Intellect, of course. It's also a tutor, which is strong because you get specific things and that gives you a lot of control. The question is, of course, do you want to draw one attack minions from your deck? This is not something you'd run in an aggro deck, for instance, to get a couple Righteous Protectors or Argent Squires. I don't think that's worth it. You've got Divine Favor for aggro. It's a much better alternative that just reloads your hand a vast majority of the time and often helps you win games because you get so many resources and all those reload potentials. Crystology doesn't do that. I think this is more of almost a tech card, but it's a tech card that's for your own deck, right? It's a tutor. It's something that will specifically help you achieve a combo. But the question becomes, well, what am I going to draw? Is it Linessa Sunsorrow? That's a pretty good option. If that's like a centerpiece for your buff deck, maybe you could run Crystology to make sure that you find your Linessa. Stonehill Defenders are solid cards, but is it really worth it just to get 2 Stonehills? I don't know that that's really worth a card like this. There are other things you could run, other draw options, because Stonehills aren't something you desperately need that win you the game or are going to keep you alive. I mean, of course, taunts could keep you alive in a pinch, but there might be better alternatives. But what if it's like a mech deck and it's a meat wagon that you're trying to get? That's possible too. I don't think that will ever happen. But there are one attack cards that do interesting specific sorts of things, and Crystology can help you find them. That's why I think this is a fine card. I don't expect it to see a lot of play. It's not bad by any means. It does something in a positive direction. It's efficient for its effect, and it's narrow enough in its design that a deck might want to use it eventually, but I don't think many decks will, because ultimately at the end of the day, most one-attack minions are rather weak, right? They just either do something weird or specific, but they're not game enders, they're not combo pieces typically, so why are you trying to draw those more than anything else in your deck? Most of the time, you're probably not. So completely fine card, a good design in a lot of ways, but probably just one that's not needed at the moment. And even if it is needed in the future, it's never going to be an amazing game-defining, meta-defining card. It's just going to be a good one. And now I have Missile Launcher, a new neutral mech. And I gotta say, the artwork on this one doesn't look like Hearthstone to me for some reason. I don't know what it is. It almost looks like a bad video game render or something. I don't know if it's the design or I don't know, it just doesn't look Hearthstone-esque to me. Maybe I'm just seeing it. You guys are gonna have to share your thoughts in the comments. Does that look like a Hearthstone card to you? Looks like Yu-Gi-Oh or something to me. I'm not a Yu-Gi-Oh guy, but yeah, that's an aside. Anyway, this is a 6 mana neutral minion. It's a mech. It's 4/4. It's got magnetic, so you can apply this as a buff to other minions, and it reads, at the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all other characters. So, weird card. You could think of this as like a pseudo Despicable Dreadlord at first, but note that it says all other characters, not just enemy characters. So it's not even as good as Despicable Dreadlord at a base level, right? It does deal damage to your opponent's face, which I guess is a little bit better than Despicable Dreadlord, but also you deal damage to your own face and your own minions, and there might be some big downsides there that make this a little bit worse. And it's 6 mana, and it's only a 4/4. So as a minion itself, Missile Launcher looks a little awkward to me, worse than other cards. Now, it's okay for a card to be worse than Despicable Dreadlord, because Despicable Dreadlord's a really good card. But still, 4/4 for 6, not that exciting. This ping effect is probably only going to get to go off once, which means if you compare this to Dread Infernal, it looks a lot worse too. It's like a Dread Infernal that's slower with its effect, but it also has way worse stats. So when viewing this as a minion, it looks like a pretty weak card. I would say this is like a 2-star card for a minion. But then you've got this magnetic aspect that makes it look a little bit more exciting to me, because now it's a Blessing of Kings with an AoE, with a Whirlwind attached. And that's probably okay for 6 mana. Still a little overcosted, the comparison I made, that's 2 5-mana cards. But remember, this is bundled into one, and that's worth a little bit. It's also a mech itself too, so it can be a base for magnetic if you're building into some sort of magnetic plan. But if you have something on board and you're able to give it a Blessing of Kings, take a value trade, Whirlwind off some stuff of your opponent, that's exciting. And then in particular with Warrior, that's a class that can benefit a lot from dealing 1 damage to all other characters, even their own stuff. Between Enrage, between things like Armorsmith, that Whirlwind that's going off every turn could benefit you if your deck is built to support it. The challenge there is fitting all that stuff in, making it work, finding a body for this thing. Ultimately, I do think this card will end up being more awkward than useful. It's not just aggressively terrible. It's not a 1-star card by any means. It's got some elements that might work in specific settings that do something active. It's got an immediacy to it thanks to magnetic. So despite the downfall of it as a minion, it's saved a little bit by its buff, but still a card that faces a lot of challenges and has a lot to overcome. I don't think this is going to be a staple in mech decks. I don't think it's going to be really in many at all, if any, so not my favorite card of the set. So now let's talk about Academic Espionage, and I think this is one of my favorite cards of the entire set. This is completely bonkers. 4-mana spell for Rogue. You shuffle 10 cards from your opponent's class into your deck, and then those cards only cost 1. So this is a Thief Rogue, Burgle Rogue, whatever you want to call it, dream card. It's so exciting. Tess Greymane just became the 5-star card I always knew that she would be. So not only is this like the ultimate anti-fatigue card because you can just get 10 cards for only 4 mana, that's insane. It's also this potentially ridiculous tempo card where you can get really big scary stuff and then play it for only 1 mana. So as long as your deck is built with enough card draw to move through those and keep your hand full and keep the threats coming, the power options for Academic Espionage are very real. You can get that 1-mana Tyrian Forge-Ring. You can get 4 1-mana Tyrian Forge-Rings and play them all in a single turn if you're super lucky. So the high roll potential on this is completely ridiculous, and I have almost zero doubts there will be some sort of deck built around this that works. And thanks to things like Myra's Unstable Element, you can, of course, make those the only cards in your deck if you want. You can play Myra's and then immediately play Academic Espionage. You don't have to worry about fatigue anymore after your Myra's, and now you're drawing a ton of 1-cost cards that are sometimes going to suck. Admittedly, you'll get, you know, backstabs occasionally when you're playing against other rogues and you're super disappointed that they're 1 mana. Other times you'll get the Tyrians, you'll get the big, crazy, scary legendary spells, you'll get all kinds of nutty stuff, Death Knights, the list doesn't end, right? So that's going to be good if you can get to a game state where that works. The challenge for a card like this, and it's always going to be a problem for things like this, is that it's not going to be the easiest card to play. You don't want to spend 4 mana and just like pass a turn on tempo to add some potential threats to your deck that you may not see for a while. So you have to set up a game state, board state, survivability state where you can afford to do this without much risk. So for instance, against aggro decks, this might not be something you want to do. You could still potentially do it with a preparation, for instance, to make this 1 mana, prep Myra's, prep Academic Espionage, get 1 mana cards. 1 mana cards will more efficiently perhaps contest aggro than would more expensive cards you might otherwise draw. Not to mention, you could just put this in a very control-oriented deck that has a lot of survivability, taunts, vanishes, all that stuff to help you keep alive until you can play Academic Espionage in a way with your tests or until you draw your tests so that you can do some big, crazy, scary stuff. So not an easy card to use, not a card every deck wants to run. It has limitations, it has caps on its efficiencies, but when it works and when a deck supports it, this is a game-changing, meta-changing sort of card. And we've already seen things like Lab Recruiter and the Pogo Hopper that also support this like deck emptying style of play. There might be some world where all of this stuff fits together, and there might even be some other card that comes out that even adds onto that pile too. We don't know yet. I think this is already scary, crazy good potentially, and it might get even worse, or arguably even better, I should say, for the deck idea, worse for Hearthstone perhaps. But nonetheless, exciting card, a lot of potential, really, really strong. I think incredibly cool too. Great design. I'm going to play this a million times, I suspect, and I can't wait. Academic Espionage is a strong card. So that wraps it up for my detailed reviews. Now let's jump into the quick reviews. The Boomship is a 4-star card. Eternium Rover is a 5-star card. Goblin Bomb is a 2-star card. Fireworks Tech is a 4-star card. Boommaster Flark is a 3-star card. Mechanical Whelp is a 2-star card. Eureka is a 3-star card. Crystology is a 3-star card. Missile Launcher is a 2-star card. Academic Espionage is a 4-star card. And there you go, guys. This review is done. Of course, share your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing everything you guys have to say. You offer tons of new insights. You always show me new stuff, new combos, new ideas. Can't wait to read it. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.